Well, good morning again. So I was watching something this week, and it was about this guy who lost his wallet, right? And in his wallet was over $1,000 worth of cash, and he had lost it on the street, and somebody picked up the wallet and returned it to him, right? And so this man who lost his wallet was shocked that all the money was in there and he returned everything. And so he posted it on social media, and all of the people that were his followers were shocked that his money was returned to him. The whole thing was shocking, right? And so it kind of gives a telltale of the culture that we live in, that integrity is shocking, right? Integrity is shocking. It's something that has gone on in our culture where there is sometimes in culture, especially when you think you can get away with something without anybody seeing, that integrity is surprising to people. And it's kind of a shame. In fact, there is a whole TV show made up of people acting or not acting with integrity and seeing what happens. I don't know if you guys have ever seen the TV show What Would You Do? There was a TV show out there called What Would You Do? And it would film people, and it would show people doing kind of weird things or suspicious things, and seeing if bystanders would step in. I actually experienced one time my college, when I was an undergrad, did something similar to this show. It wasn't actually the show, but I was walking out of class after the class got over, and there's a ton of people going on, and I see this couple arguing, and so I am just trying not to pay attention because it's none of my business or whatever. But the guy was a little bit bigger, and the girl was much smaller than he was. And he grabbed her, and I don't know what came over me, but I put my arm on the guy, and I said, "Hey, leave her alone." I'm really glad that this was a TV show, because judging by the size of this guy, I was in trouble. So it ended up being a TV show that the school did, and they put on to see who would step in these situations. And the people who step into these situations are really people with integrity. Now, I think this was an instance where I acted with integrity. We're going to see in my sermon that there are many times that I don't act with integrity, right? That we all kind of struggle sometimes to always act with integrity. In fact, we hear all these bad stories, right? There are pastors that lack integrity and then don't have accountability by a board, and they kind of run the church into the ground financially, or there's a scandal. There's church leaders who don't steward their finances well, the church's finances well, and they get in trouble, and what they are lacking is integrity. I don't know if you guys have ever seen the movie Titanic, but in that movie, there are all these people trying to get on lifeboats, right? And the people who are welcoming people onto the lifeboats are saying women and children first. Well, in the movie, all these men are fighting and trying to get to the boats, and one guy pays to get on the boat, another guy fights and tries to get on a boat, and one of the seamen actually shoots this guy, and then he shoots himself in the head in the movie. Well, this is a complete fabrication. This would have never happened on the Titanic. In fact, there are accounts of many men writing down in their journals maybe the last time they had written anything in their life, and many women and children who recounted that men did not try to get in the lifeboat before women and children. There was a type of integrity back then that doesn't exist today. Now, listen, I'm usually the first one to complain when I hear people say, hey, we have a lack of integrity, right? Because So usually it's a person from an older generation speaking to a younger one. Oh, your generation doesn't understand this, your generation doesn't understand that, and there have been many times that I have stopped listening. But there is something to the point that integrity has gone down in society as a whole. Historically, this is true. If you are looking at it from a standpoint of just being an observer, you see in history that men were kind of more chivalrous back then and kind of took a step back. And I'm not saying anything necessarily against some men these days, but as a whole, chivalrous has come down. Now, there's a lot that kind of goes into that, and I don't have time to account that today. But integrity is vital to our faith. Being a person of integrity is vital to your faith. And there is a character in the Old Testament that displays this. So we're going through the Old Testament this summer. We're talking through a bunch of things. We talked about creation and fall, call and covenant. Last week I talked about encountering God. Well, this week I want to talk about the character of Joseph. Joseph was a man of integrity. And because he was a man of integrity, God entrusted him to actually save all of Egypt, and by extension, his whole family. Now, Jacob, which we learned about last week, who encountered God, he had 12 sons. He had 11 at this point. Joseph was the 11th son, and he favored Joseph. Last week we talked about generational curses, that favoritism played a big part in the patriarchs of Genesis. Well, Jacob favored Joseph, and when I can tell you from personal experience, when one of the siblings is favored, you can resent that a little bit, right? That when there is favoritism, the other siblings resent that. And so Joseph's brothers did maybe what many of us have wanted to do, and that is sell their brother into slavery, right? We don't say that we would do that, but I'm sure that we have all felt that before. And so they sell Joseph into slavery because he had a dream that all of his brothers would bow down to us, right? To him. And so even his mother and his father would bow down to him. So their jealousy led them to sell Joseph into slavery, thinking that they had ended all the hopes of Joseph's dream. And so we're going to pick up the story of Joseph entering into Egypt. His brothers had just betrayed him, and now he is sold into slavery, and he is entering into Egypt. And so if you would pick up with me in Genesis 39. Genesis 39. We're just going to read all of Genesis 39. It'll be up on your screen. Genesis 39. Now Joseph had been taken to Egypt. An Egyptian named Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard, bought him from the Israelites who had brought him there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man, serving in the household of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made everything he did successful, Joseph found favor with his master and became his personal attendant. Potiphar also put him in charge of his household and placed all that he owned under his authority. From the time that he put him in charge of his household and of all that he owned, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house because of Joseph. The Lord the blessing was on all that he owned, in his house and in his fields. He left all that he had owned under Joseph's authority. He did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. Now Joseph was well built and handsome. After some time, his master's wife looked longingly at Joseph and said, "Sleep with me." But he refused. "Look," he said to his master's wife, "with me my master does not concern himself with anything in his house, and he has put all that he has owned under my authority. No one in this house is greater than I am. He has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. So how could I do this immense evil, and how could I sin against God?" Although she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her. Now one day he went into the house to do his work, and none of the household servants were there. She grabbed him by his garment and said, "Sleep with me." But leaving his garment in her hand, he escaped and ran outside. When she saw that he left his garment with her and had run outside, she called her household servant. "Look," she said to them, "my husband brought a Hebrew man to make fools of us. He came so he could sleep with me, and I screamed as loud as I could. When he heard me scream for help, he left his garment beside me and ran outside." She put Joseph's garment beside her until her master came home. Then she told him this same story. "The Hebrew slave you brought to us came to make a fool out of me. But when I screamed for help, he left his garment beside me and ran outside." When his master heard the story his wife told him, "These are the things your slave did to me," he was furious and had him thrown into prison, where the king's prisoners were confined. So Joseph was there in prison, but the Lord was with Joseph and extended kindness to him. He granted him favor with the prison warden. The warden put all the prisoners who were in the prison under Joseph's authority, and he was responsible for everything that had been done there. The warden did not bother with anything under Joseph's authority because the Lord was with him, and the Lord made everything he did successful. So we in this story we see Joseph having integrity in subtle and not so subtle ways. And the first thing we can really draw out of this is that Joseph had integrity, both naturally, right? He naturally had integrity, but also because God was with him. Because he was focused on God, and he was faithful to God, God was with him, and his integrity, in part, came from there. It is important that we see both of these things. God was with him, right? It is scattered throughout this chapter. In chapter 39, verse 2, it says that he was with him when he entered into Egypt. In verse 3, that he served in Potiphar's house, and that when he was serving in Potiphar's house, God was with him. So much so that Potiphar noticed. Then when he's thrown into prison, God was still with him, and it extends throughout his incarceration. And it brings up the point that depending on God and naturally having integrity are mutually beneficial. They're mutually beneficial. When you depend on God, you become a person of integrity. And when you display integrity, you rely on God more. They mutually benefit each other. And it is an important thing to notice. In fact, Joseph was put in charge of a household. He was a slave, but he was in charge of the whole household because you could see that his master could see that he had integrity. In fact, I believe that integrity saved Joseph's life. Now, one thing that would have been clear at this point is that if you were a foreign slave, you had no rights. There was no rights. In fact, if a foreign slave had done this, they just would have been executed. No harm, no foul. They're not a citizen. They are a foreign slave. And somehow Joseph ends up in a prison, but it is a high-quality prison, right? It's not one that is for the everyday Egyptian, but it is for people who are connected to Pharaoh. And so what I believe is kind of underlying this passage is that Potiphar sort of believed Joseph because he had seen the integrity throughout his stay in Egypt. and he was between a rock and a hard place. Now, we all know people who don't have integrity, right? And so if somebody is constantly lying, we begin to see that. If people are making false accusations, it starts to come clear through time. And I believe that Potiphar believed that his wife was a little bit deceitful. And that is why he threw Joseph into prison, because he had no choice. Either he shamed his wife, or he got rid of this servant. And so I believe that Joseph's integrity saved his life. Now, also, it is important to note that integrity happens when no one is watching. Integrity happens when no one is watching. The truth is that people can fake integrity. That is just the truth of it. They can come in and they can make sure that they look good. They clean themselves up while they're in public, but maybe they're not having integrity at home. And that is why we need discerning people who are kind of looking out for that. But true integrity happens in the dark. In the dark, when no one is watching. It's when you are alone and no one can see whether you make the right decision or the wrong decision, that you are displaying true integrity. And I can think of two big things where this comes about. And it is sexuality and money, right? That we always hear about these leaders who are getting into sexual problems and not displaying integrity. And then we also hear about these people that are hoarding money and kind of not having integrity with money. And so this is a big problem. Now, let me just be honest with you guys. Our culture views sex as a very good thing, right? It's okay to have sex outside of marriage. It's okay for a young man to look at pornography, right? But men will be men. Well, that is false. That is not what the Bible teaches. Boys will be boys is one of the worst excuses I have ever heard in my life. That is showing a lot of lack of integrity. We have a massive problem with pornography in this country. You can look at pornography whenever you want. It's at the click of your hands. And we have this culture of just pushing this in. And you know what? You're doing it in the darkness, so you're not harming anybody. That is, again, false. There are people who are severely hurt. And also, sexual immorality leads to a tainting of the soul. Right? This is a serious thing. It's a serious problem. Sex outside of marriage is not how God had designed it. And so if you really want to show integrity, the first step is by having integrity in your sex life. Having sex inside of marriage only. It is about self-control. Now, I usually don't talk about these things, right? But I honestly think this is a huge problem. But also, let me say this. Jesus forgives. But you can't be engaging in sexual immorality in the dark and have a passionate spiritual life in the light. It just can't happen. And people won't know. That's the truth. I won't know if you're looking at pornography. And this is not just a problem with guys. There are many girls who have this problem. But the truth is that you lose power when you are engaging in this. You lose the power of the Holy Spirit on your life. And the same problem happens with money. There are so many things that people misuse money. It is just a very, very large problem because these things are so tempting. And honestly, I think that for us as Christians, to avoid this, first of all, you got to recognize that this is wrong, right? That stealing money or hoarding money, or maybe you're part of a business and you're stealing time, right? Where you're clocking out 5 minutes early, but the clock says that you have 8 hours, right? That is stealing time. These are things that we need to avoid doing. But the only way that we're going to stop this is by creating safeguards. Safeguards. And so I just want to talk a little bit about what I do to avoid this stuff. Because I want no temptation at all. I want to avoid those temptations. And so really, if you want to avoid temptations, if you want to avoid the possible mistake of sinning, then you have to think in advance. And so I always say, never give Satan a foothold. Never put yourself into a situation. So I strongly believe that I shouldn't have meetings with girls one-on-one outside of my wife. And so I make sure that there's somebody else there so that both the person that I'm meeting with is comfortable and I am protected. And then when it comes to money, I can tell you that when we collect the tithe, I don't collect it. I don't touch it. I avoid that. And now the church luckily has those rules in place already, so I don't even have to worry about that. But we have two people counting the money, and then they give it to a third person. And when I spend money for the church, I have to go to our treasurer Wayne to be reimbursed. And what does this do? What do these things do? It protects me just in case. It gives me no opportunity to sin. The Bible talks about don't give Satan a foothold. And so those are things, we have to be thinking of things in advance if we want to have integrity. My third point is that integrity is about stewarding God's gifts. We all need to steward God's gifts to us. And so each and every one of you are gifted and blessed by God. You have talents that are specific to you. You have a certain amount of money that God has allotted to you. You have time that you can give and spend. And those are all things that you need to steward well. You need to have integrity. And so I've talked about this before, but I don't always like the term accountability partner, right? I like the idea of accountability to a certain extent, but I believe that we need to have Christians in our lives that are more like editors, that are removing the wrong things, because we're not really accountable to each other unless we sin against each other in a specific way. Right? But I need these people in my life who are saying, you know what? You're not loving that person correctly. You're sinning in this way. You're missing the mark. And so I want to give an example. And this is a time that I did not display integrity. And so after Maria and I got married, I was living in Connecticut. And one thing that I noticed was that a bunch of the Christians over there, the young adults, they drank alcohol. And so I'm 22 years old, I am a Christian, I am a leader in the church, and I began to drink alcohol. And I only had one or two, right, and nothing too bad, until one night a guy that I was discipling said, hey, I know that you used to drink, but I bet you can't drink worth a lick. I bet you can't do that. And so one thing to goad me into getting to do things is to make it a competition, because I'm like, oh, I'm going to win that competition. And so with this guy that I was discipling, I got drunk. At 22 years old, I'm just married, I get drunk, and man, do I feel terrible. Now, the thing with these type of things is that they don't just stay a secret, they kind of spread throughout the community. And so a friend of mine came to me and in a loving way said, what are you doing? You are discipling this guy. You are trying to teach him the ways of God, and you're getting drunk with him. Now, the Bible's pretty clear that getting drunk is wrong. It is very clear. There's no gray area in there. And so my friend, he rebuked me, but he did it in a loving way. And honestly, we need to have those people in our lives. That if you want to be a person of integrity, you have to have somebody lifting you up and helping you when you miss the mark, when you miss out. And so you need to invite people into that. If nobody tells you that you do anything wrong, you are not a person who is approachable. Let me repeat that. If nobody tells you you do anything wrong, you are not somebody who is approachable. Now, we don't invite everybody to say whatever they want to us, right? That's a mess, and people are sometimes not discerning, and they say crazy things. And there are people that you should not listen to. But there are people in your lives who are friends, who you are close to, that you need to give access into your life and speak into your life. So I always am in a discipleship group. And so in these discipleship groups, I sometimes allow them to speak out and say, hey, you know what, you're missing the mark right there. And those are important things, right? Where we have people in our lives that we give access to say things. And hopefully they're discerning enough to say it in a loving way, right? Some of us are sensitive. I won't say who. But, we are all sensitive sometimes. And so, but we need these people in our lives to call it out. To say, hey, this is where you're missing the mark. And really, these people are important. So that friend that kind of called me out and saw that I was missing the mark, he is a great friend to me. And honestly, I ask him questions and I allow him to say, hey, you know what? You were not the best in this situation. And I'm vulnerable with him. And I let him say these things so that I can improve. I can become somebody who has more integrity. And let me tell you this, that there are people in the Bible that display immense integrity. And these people are actually very important. So I don't know if you guys know the guy Paul, who wrote most of the New Testament, but my point is not that Paul had integrity. My actual point is that Barnabas, his friend, had integrity. He had built a resume with people, and people trusted him. And so when he said, hey, this guy Paul, who is killing Christians and throwing them in jail, well, he is a believer now. And that is how we got one of the most prolific writers of the New Testament. Because a man of integrity said, hey, I see this person. And you know what? He really has met Jesus. That when you have integrity, you can lift other people up. We see that with Jonathan, with David, right? That David, the king, we think, oh man, David, it was such a good king. David would have been dead without Jonathan. He would have been dead. And so Jonathan lifted him up. We all need people of integrity in our lives, and we need to be having integrity to others to lift of God, a work of God working through this church, through this community. We need to be people of integrity. And honestly, integrity grows through situations. That facing situations that are good and bad help us grow our integrity. That, Joseph was sold into slavery. That's a bad thing, right? And then he's thrown into prison. Another bad thing. And these are things that really suck in his life. And you know what? They grew him as a person of integrity. And what does Joseph go on to do? He tells Pharaoh, and he interprets Pharaoh's dreams, and then says, hey, this is how you can get out of this famine that is coming on Egypt. And thousands and thousands of lives were saved through Joseph's integrity. right? It's a important thing, but also there were some good things that happened. Joseph was put in charge of Potiphar's household, that each and every situation is an opportunity to grow your integrity. Learning to have integrity is vital to our walk. It preps us for the next thing, right? Whatever God has for you next, He's developing it in you now. Whatever God has for you next, He's developing it in you now. And we all have a next. There's something coming, right? There's something that God is going to require you to have the gifts that you are working on now for the next stage. We all need integrity. We all want to hear the statement, "Well done, you good and faithful servant," right? That this is a parable about the talents, that this master gives talents to 3 of his servants, and 2 of them spend it well, and 1 of them doesn't. And we all are excited when we get to heaven. We want to hear, "Well done, good and faithful servant." And we end it there, right? But that's not what the verse is about. It's, "Well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with little. Now be faithful with a lot." But you need to have integrity. You need to have integrity to have fullness in Christ. Up on the screen is going to be Psalm 15, 1 through 3, and then verse 5. And I just want to read this. It says, "Lord, who can dwell in your tent? Who can live on your holy mountain?" So who indeed? Who can dwell in the house of the Lord? Who can dwell on his holy mountain? To the one who lives blameless, practices righteousness, and acknowledges the truth in his heart, who does not slander with his tongue, who does not harm his friend or discredit his neighbor, who does not lend his silver at interest or take a bribe against the innocent. The one who does these things will never be shaken. Who wants to dwell in the house of the Lord? Who wants to dwell in the house of the Lord? Now, I think a lot of times when we talk about these topics, when I'm preaching about these topics, it is fairly easy to listen and say, "Yep, that guy over there sitting in the pew right beside me, he's not a person of integrity. Nope, and that person, I just got a Bible verse that I'm going to tell this person later, and I'm going to use it against them," right? But I think for us now, it's important to see that sometimes we're all lacking in integrity. Sometimes our hearts are stirred the wrong way. And so I think for us now, it's important to say, "Lord, where am I lacking? Where am I missing out on all that you have for me? How can I be a person of integrity more?" Right? And these are not just questions for you guys. They're questions for me. As I look and I study the Bible and I read these things, I think about all the times that I have missed the mark or not shown integrity in some situations. But it is so important to have integrity. If we are going to be a community that is different, that is in contrast to the society, we need to be showing integrity over and over and over again. When we have a chance to do wrong, we must do right. We must display integrity. So as Steph comes back up, I want you guys to stand. Whatever sector you are in life, whether you're in business, whether you're in manufacturing, whatever it may be, I want you guys to think about how you can have integrity. I think I didn't say that clearly enough. If you guys want to stand with me, sorry. I said it in passing, right? That hit it right in there. So think about the times that you might not have shown integrity. You're forgiven of those things. You're free in Christ. But, man, we need to be people who are different. So think about the work that is starting in you today. It starts with you. This church changes by everybody showing integrity over and over and over again on a consistent basis. And let's be honest, I'll be the first one to admit, I have not shown integrity in the past week, in the past month, in the past 6 months as the pastor. There have been times that I have not lived up to this calling. And I think if you really reflect, you will find that that might be you too. I don't preach to give you guys like good information. I don't think that that's really important. And maybe you guys are like, well, you're not giving us any anyway. But honestly, I preach because I think it's important for us to be transformed, right? And I'll just say it, like, you're not going to be transformed in a sermon necessarily unless during this last song you come to Jesus and you say, Lord, change me. Whatever I need to change me. Like, embrace God right now and say, Lord, I want to be transformed, because we can all use more transformation. We can all use more integrity. And yes, Joseph was a person of integrity, but there were things lacking in his life too. So let's just join in prayer. Dear and Heavenly Father, Lord, I thank you for being so good. God, you are a God of integrity. You are goodness and fullness and truth. And we thank you that you are the source of life. That as the sun comes up every morning, that you are the one that raises the sun to shine on us and to be made new each and every day. Lord, I pray for a powerful work of the Spirit. I pray that people would be being transformed through this last song, not because of anything, but encountering you, the living God, Jehovah Jireh. You are good, and we thank you for that.